left off with question 36.
And then I'm gonna do 2 pounds, a pound of each pack of the Alton ham, cut thin.
Hold on here. I'm going to copy and paste this and put it in the chat as well. So for some of you, it might be easier to sort of follow along that way. After today, I will also post this set of practice tests for you in Google Classroom. And as I've mentioned all through this week, there are also language arts practice tests on here, and science practice tests, and math practice tests. So, it's certainly worth your time to go through those if you want. And then you would have this one again also to look at in the future if need be. Okay, so let's take a look here. At our map. So we left off with a pie chart yesterday. We were talking about refugees. We're starting today looking at another map. So now we're looking at a thematic map, right? We talked about some of the differences here. I did want to point out when it comes to maps, right, that we talked about yesterday, directions, right? That was a bit of an issue, which way's north on the map, what's going to be west, what's going to be east, what's going to be south. And a lot of times you'll just have to make the assumption that it's north is going to be up. Most maps are oriented that way. They're designed that way. You're not going to find a United States map that's turned upside down. They're not going to do something like that to you. The types of questions that we are encountering are pretty broad when it comes to maps. Some are direction based, like the one on DeSoto yesterday. A lot of information will be population driven or economics driven, which is the case here. So always look at the title so you understand the map first off. U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, per capita personal income by state, 2011. So what that all means is basically per individual across the United States, there's an average income per capita per state. Okay, so this is showing you per state, basically what the average income is, right? So that per capita refers to each state. And you could see here the various shades. I won't get into a great deal of detail here. The way they shade this kind of is weird because you would think that it would descend just like the numbers do, right? So the dark gray is 44,000 up to 73,105. You would think the next color would be the next shade down, but they've kind of mixed it up here. You don't have a sort of gradation as it goes along. It's sort of hit and miss. But you can definitely see, in the legend there, in the map legend, what that means. So 44 to 73,000 for the top number. We go down to the next sort of shade of gray is at the very lower end. And per capita is 32,176 to 34,650. And then we see that by state, right? Okay, so let's see. I want to try Nautica here first. So based on the map above, the states with the lowest per capita person income in 2011 were found in which of the following locations? So another directional oriented question here. A, north and west. B, the northeast. C, no specific area, but all parts of the nation. Or D, around large cities. You can take a look at the map here again. Nautica, are you there?
Yes.
Lowest per capita person income.
The lowest. Let me see. That'll be 34. Let's
So 32.
like, right. Is it like we're like Georgia and Alabama?
So we have some over here, like Idaho, Utah, New Mexico, Kentucky, West Virginia, and then we have like
South Carolina.
Yep. We could take a look at the question again or the answers.
Yeah, look at the answers. Based on the map of the state, what states for the lowest count of 20 was found, and which are the following locations? So northwest, northeast, no specific areas, but all parts is that one. No specific areas.
No specific areas. See, yeah, there you go. Right, because it's in the west. Right, we have Idaho, Utah, New Mexico are in that color. The Appalachians, right? Kentucky, West Virginia, and then Mississippi. See, these are two states I always get mixed up: Mississippi and Alabama, and then South Carolina.
I did say Georgia.
Georgia, yeah, but I mean, you were in the. Because they're very similar shapes, right? But I get Mississippi and Alabama mixed up. Alabama is next to Georgia, and the Mississippi is next to Louisiana. And you can always remember Louisiana because it's shaped like an L. So that's my help for mapping. And also Vermont. You see the gray one up here? It's shaped like a V. So that's how I remember. Yeah. But yeah, so it's spread out. So it's not, another thing to look at with this question around large cities. We don't see information about cities on this map, right? So test taking skill, you can eliminate a question like that. If it's not giving you information or data about that, you can eliminate that. North and west. So up here across the north, no. West, no, right? It is certainly distributed in multiple locations. So good job there. All right, 38. Okay, so a little bit of a passage here and some information. Infographics is something that I think we talked about a little bit. We had maybe one lesson on it. So it's just another way to look at information in a graphical format where it's not necessarily a map. It's not necessarily, bar charts or line graphs or things like that. It's just uses pictures like a pictograph to represent information. So more along the lines of like a pie chart a lot of times is the way to think about it, because they'll have like representations, to show you. We'll talk about it here in a second. So this information is for questions 38, 39. It is a little light and a little small, so we'll see how we do here. So it's saying after the terrorist attacks on U.S. soil on September 11th, 2001, the United States government saw a need for more security. As a result, the Department of Homeland Security was created. This federal department was first charged with the duties of preventing terrorism. However, the role of Homeland Security expanded, creating a vast organization with far-reaching duties. Below is a summary of the agency's work. So it says that every day DHS employees all over the country work to protect the American public from a range of threats, including terrorism, natural disasters, cyber attacks, and other emergencies and disasters. Whether by air, sea, land, or in cyberspace, DHS vigilance over the last 10 years helps keep our nation safe. And it's broken into air, sea, and land, right? So air, pre-screening 2 million passengers before they fly out of within or over the U.S., screened 1.8 million passengers and their checked baggage for explosives and prohibited items at 448 airports before they board aircraft, right? So we've got a little bit of information, right? Sort of in a graphic kind of format. Perform 200 inspections of air carriers and airport infrastructure. And on the C here, it says patrol 3.4 million square miles of U.S. waterways, seize 19,040 pounds of drugs at or near U.S. ports of entry, lead 100 plus waterborne patrols near maritime critical infrastructure and key resources, and then conduct 54 search and rescue cases. So that was one change with the Department of Homeland Security. The Coast Guard used to be under the Department of Defense, and I think it was actually part of the Department of the Navy. And when Department of Homeland Security came about, the Coast Guard moved to the Department of Homeland Security. So a lot of what you see here as far as patrolling and stuff, that's actually done by the Coast Guard. But we'll take a look at the questions now. Oh, there's the land. Okay, so a little more information. Screen 100% of cargo and vehicles entering the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. Naturalize 3,200 new U.S. citizens. Remember, we talked about the federal government. That's their responsibility. And so that is partially DHS's responsibility. Verify the identities of 109,000 applicants for visas or border crossing cards. Go back up to the top here. Train 350 members of law enforcement, faith-based, academic, and private sector communities to respond to active shooter scenarios. Process 1 million travelers entering the U.S. by air, sea, and land. Seize 500,000 in counterfeit U.S. currency before it is introduced into circulation. And then 5,880 plus federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial emergency management response personnel. So training 2,100 plus officers and agents from 90 plus federal agencies, as well as 125 plus state, local, rural, tribal, territorial, and international officers and agents. 94 stakeholders from critical infrastructure sectors to identify, mitigate, and respond to cyber attacks. Provide 3.7 million in federal disaster grants to individuals and households following presidentially declared disaster declarations. Engage the public every day through if you see something, say something. Provide Secret Service protection for an average of 30 U.S. government officials and their families. And then, so we have air, sea, land, and then we have the role of sort of the cybersecurity. So the virtual space that the Department of Homeland Security provides for responsibility. So prevent $6.8 million in potential losses through cybercrime investigations, respond to 70 cybersecurity incidents per month while issuing warnings for each, and issue 20 plus actionable cyber alerts for public and private sector to protect their systems. Okay, so there's all our information, land, sea, air, and cyberspace. So let's see, Devi, let's go to you here. Based on the information, which of the following would be an area Homeland Security would investigate? So A, searching for drug smugglers in Mexico. B, going to Iran to find terrorist groups. C, providing assistance after an earthquake in California. D, investigating a shooting in Peru.
Providing assistance after earthquake in California.
Good job, right? And right there in the name, right? Homeland Security. If there is an international issue that the United States is involved in, it will go to a different department. It'll probably be the State Department, which will work with other, State departments and ambassadors and that role as far as, or military, drug smugglers in Mexico, that would be more of a, military role. Finding terrorists or going to Iran to find terrorist groups is something that we would not do presently because of our relationship with Iran. But that would also be a military role. Investigating a shooting in Peru, maybe like the CIA or the FBI might be involved with that. But, right in its name, Homeland Security, they are worried about the internal safety, security of the United States within our borders. So, moving on here, let's see, 39. So the next question for our infographic here. So as used in the excerpt, the word vigilance most likely can be defined by which of the following? A, and I'm going to go back to Nautica here for this one. A religious ritual. B, an alert watchfulness. C, a long ceremony. Or D, an attack on the country.
Whew, I just ran from downstairs. Okay.
Take your time.
Okay. Which one are we doing?
So it's 39 here. So they're asking us about the word vigilance and how we define that. So the word vigilance, is it A, a religious ritual, B, an alert watchfulness, C, a long ceremony, or D, an attack on the country?
When I hear like the word vigilance, I think of like revenge. So I feel like it's an attack on the country.
A little bit, but that's a different kind of root. So vigilance is an alert watchfulness, an alert watchfulness, to stay vigilant, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but you are now vengeance, right? VENGANCE.
Okay.
I think I misspelled that. But anyway, but right, if you think of vigilantes, right? So people that are acting outside of the law, in the name of the law and stuff like that. Yeah, you're close, but it's more about an alert watchfulness in this context than seeking justice, I guess you could say. So yeah, 39 is B as in boy. But I mean, that's the right way to go about it. You're applying sort of those context clues and stuff like that, but more about a watchfulness here. Okay, and then we have a chart. So using the following chart and graph, we have a chart and a graph to answer questions 40, 41. So first off, we have this is about the transatlantic slave trade, which we discussed early on when I was talking about history. So from 1451 to 1870, and we have the number of slaves transported in the thousands by a time frame of about 99 years. So yeah, right around 100 years. Well, that's not correct. Wait a minute. Okay, the time frames are different. It's 99. It's over 100 years here. It's 99 here. 109 here, and then 59 there. So the time frames are a little different in each case. But what we're seeing then, though, what's going to be more important, right? So British North America, right? So the number of slaves transported to British North America, 1701, 1811. In Spanish America, right? So that's also going to be the Caribbean. So in the Atlantic, the Caribbean islands, which are Dutch and British and French colonies, Portuguese Brazil. So the portion of Brazil that was colonized by Portugal, the number of slaves transported to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And then we have totals for each. Okay. So again, that's in the thousands. So we're talking about 348,000 in British North America from 1701 to 1810. All right, so there is our different colonies or colonial locations, different parts of the world. And then this graph showing slave transportation. So this one is showing us by a similar time frame. It's using the same time frame almost. 16, 17. Okay, no, it is. It's using the same time frame, which makes sense. And we're showing the transportation of those slaves. They're not saying, they don't give it, it's saying 100, 200, 300, 400. They're not saying the real value there, which I think is also in the thousands. And we're seeing how that transportation worked over time, right? So our horizontal line at the bottom, right, is our time, and the vertical one there is showing our numbers. We see with Spanish America, it just continued going up, where it peaked for British North America in that 1701 to 1810 period, and then Europe, more generally, it declined fairly quickly. It started early and then it declined really quickly. Let's see, Devi, I'll go to you. According to the chart and graph, the transportation of slaves increased sharply in which of the following areas? So, A,
Spanish
Europe.
America.
Did you say Spanish America?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. We could see it grew sharply. Right. I mean, it just skyrocketed, soared through that time, and didn't trail off until the abolition, really, of slavery. So, and we could also see in the table here, right, 75,000 the first time frame and 606,000 in the last time frame. So we could see, you know, a great increase over time there as well. 41, I'm going to go back to Nautica. So the slave trade drastically decreased in British North America. Which of the following is the best explanation for this drop in numbers between 1811 and 1870? So, A, there were no more Africans to become slaves. B, there were no crops or work for which slave labor was needed. C, Great Britain abolished slavery in all of its colonies. Or D, Spanish America had more resources to purchase and transport slaves. Nautica, are you there?
Can I look at the
Information
map
again?
Yeah.
So there's a graph, right? So Great Britain. So as it kind of states in the question, we see a dramatic increase and just as a dramatic drop in British North America slave transportation, right? And then with the table, we see their peak at 348,000 between 1701 and 1810. And then again, you know, kind of we can see, you know, that same kind of visual in the table with a severe drop in British North America, declining really quick again. So let me go back to the question.
Okay.
So yeah, the slave trade drastically decreased in British North America. Which of the following is the best explanation for that drop?
Is it C?
Which one was that?
Great Britain abolished slavery in all of its colonies.
There you go. Yeah, C is in cat. Yes, right. And here is an example of a question where that bit of background knowledge is going to be helpful, right? Nowhere in that information do we know that British abolished slavery. But I mentioned when we talked about the American Civil War, that by the time we get to the 1860s and the time of the American Civil War, most European countries had abolished slavery, right? So by then, the United States was one of the holdouts that was still maintaining that. Most of the slaves at that point were created internally, but they were, slaves were producing new slaves, right? They were children their parents were slaves, so they were born into slavery. Whereas prior to that, through the beginning in the mid 1400s or so, really, once we get to the 1500s, where the African slave trade comes into play. So by the early 1800s, that is going away. There's no more of that industry that I talked about, where you're just displacing millions of people from the African continent and impressing them into slavery. The slaves in the United States were, they were born here rather than being imported in. So yeah, that was a good call there. All right, 42 and 43. And we have a little bit here on the Louisiana, what is this? Let the land rejoice. Louisiana Purchase Treaty. Aha. So 1803, let the land rejoice, for you have bought Louisiana for a song. And we have a letter here, General Horatio Gates to President Thomas Jefferson, July 18th, 1803. This was something we talked about. Thomas Jefferson buys the Louisiana Purchase, this huge tract of land from Napoleon, Emperor of France, who was in debt, and France couldn't really continue to extend any real power and influence into North America. So he's just going to basically, so cheaply let that land go and allow the states to purchase it. So this letter, Robert Livingston and James Monroe closed on the sweetest real estate deal of the millennium when they signed the Louisiana Purchase Treaty in Paris on April 30th, 1803. And that is, I mean, it really was, right? I know it kind of sounds like Donald Trump here, the deal of the century kind of, it was the greatest deal ever. But it really, really was that crazy good of a deal. So they were authorized to pay France up to $10 million for the port of New Orleans and the Floridas, when offered the entire territory of Louisiana, an area larger than Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Portugal combined. The American negotiators swiftly agreed to a price of $15 million. Now, I don't know what that would really be in today's money, but even so, like he says, the area, I'm a little uncertain if it is the same size or bigger, but it is in that general scope. We're talking a huge chunk of land. And although President Thomas Jefferson was a strict interpreter of the Constitution who wondered if the U.S. government was authorized to acquire new territory, he was also a visionary who dreamed of an empire for liberty that would stretch across the entire continent. As Napoleon threatened to take back the offer, Jefferson squelched whatever doubts he had, submitted the treaty to Congress, and prepared to occupy a land of unimaginable riches. The Louisiana Purchase added 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River to the United States for roughly 4 cents an acre. The United States had purchased a territory whose natural resources amounted to a richness beyond anyone's wildest calculations. Okay, and so there, right, that whole middle of the United States, we're talking Louisiana, the state of Louisiana up, the part of Arkansas, Missouri, that's part of Illinois, I believe, part of Wisconsin, part of Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, part of Colorado, all of that was added through that purchase, and we got it for a steal. I mean, just incredible. And you could see right in that, particularly in the Midwest, right? That's like the breadbasket of the United States. That's where there's a lot of our major farmland, Kansas and Nebraska, in that area. So yeah, and the resources there is just incredible. So thinking about the passage here and looking at the map, Devi, number 42 says President Jefferson was reluctant to agree to the purchase of the Louisiana territory because A, he was unsure the Constitution allowed him to make the agreement. B, he was afraid the Indians would be upset. C, he thought New Orleans would become a large trade center and difficult to control since it was so far from Washington, D.C. Or D, Spain had claimed the area as theirs, so Jefferson feared it might cause a war with Spain.
Is A?
Yes. Yeah. So basically that's what it says, right? He was, although President Thomas Jefferson was a strict interpreter of the Constitution who wondered if the U.S. government was authorized to acquire new territory, right? So right there, it says it fairly plainly. And, we talked about Jefferson and his presidency and his sort of political views. He was, sort of strict constitutionalist. And he also was he didn't want to see a big expansion of federal powers. He was more of that agrarian set that wanted to keep states' rights prevalent and on par with federal sort of primacy of the law. So he was unsure if that was something that he had the powers to do within the Constitution, but fortunately he did. So 43, Nautica. Let's give this one a try. Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. When the Federalists learned about the Louisiana Purchase, they were upset. Which of the following can be inferred about the reason the Federalists were upset? A, the Federalists thought the British were involved in the deal. B, the Federalists feared more slave states would enter the Union. C, the Federalists were concerned that more states would become Republican. Or D, the Federalists understood that the Constitution did not authorize the purchase.
Is it D?
It was C. So they're worried about those new states. So this goes into all the way to the Civil War, right? So worried that there were going to be more states that sort of supported Jefferson's party, that were going to support those sort of conservative agrarian ideas. So, they were, not unhappy with the purchase necessarily. And this is one of those things. It's overall generally really political. We see it in today's world where, Congress people will decline to vote on good legislation because it has the opposing party's name on it. It's that same sort of idea here, but in more sort of detail, they were kind of worried that, as this new territory becomes states, what political party will they align with? So 43 is C. 44, now here's something we talked about too. We got a little bit of a larger passage. So pay attention here while I read through this one. So 44 through 46, the woman suffrage movement was first seriously proposed in the United States at Seneca Falls, New York, July 19th, 1848, in a general declaration of the rights of women prepared by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and several others. The early leaders of the movement in the United States, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Lucy Stone, Abby Keller Foster, Angelina Grimke, Sarah Grimke, and others were usually also advocates of temperance and of the abolition of slavery. When, however, after the close of the Civil War, the 15th Amendment in 1870 gave the franchise to newly emancipated African-American men, but not to the women who had helped win it for them, the suffragists, for the most part, confined their efforts to the struggle for the vote. I'm going to mention a word here. So franchise, that also means voting. If you're disenfranchised, it means your voting rights have been suppressed or taken away. The National Woman Suffrage Association, led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was formed in 1869 to agitate for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Another organization, the American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Lucy Stone, was organized the same year to work through the state legislatures. In the 1870s, disheartened by the response to the proposed federal amendment, suffragists also tried other approaches to winning the vote. These included using the courts to challenge the exclusion from voting on the grounds that, as citizens, they could not be deprived of their rights as protected by the Constitution. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony attempted to vote, hoping to be arrested and to have the opportunity to test the strategy in the courts. She was arrested and indicted for knowingly, wrongfully, and unlawfully voting for a representative to the Congress of the United States. Found guilty and fined, she insisted she would never pay $1 of it. Virginia Minor, a suffrage leader in St. Louis, succeeded in getting the issue before the United States Supreme Court. But in 1875, the court ruled unanimously that citizenship did not automatically confer the right to vote, and that the issue of female enfranchisement should be decided within the states. These differing approaches, example, whether to seek a federal amendment or to work for state amendments, kept the woman suffrage movement divided until 1890, when the two societies were united as the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Later leaders included Anna Howard Shaw and Carrie Chapman Catt. Several of the states and territories, with Wyoming first in 1869, granted suffrage to the women within their borders. By 1913, 12 states and territories had granted voting rights to women. So the National Woman's Party, under the leadership of Alice Paul, Lucy Burns, and others, resolved to use the voting power of the enfranchised women to force a suffrage resolution through Congress and secure ratification from the state legislatures. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution granted nationwide suffrage to women. The 19th Amendment guarantees all American women the right to vote. Achieving this milestone required a lengthy and difficult struggle. Victory took decades of agitation and protest. Beginning in the mid-19th century, several generations of women suffrage supporters lectured, wrote, marched, lobbied, and practiced civil disobedience to achieve what many Americans considered a radical change of the Constitution. Few early supporters lived to see final victory in 1920. Debbie, for 44, it says, according to this excerpt, suffragists, suffragettes were involved in several other movements as well. Which of the following includes the other causes these women championed? A, war protests, B, environmental protests, C, temperance and abolition of slavery, or D, world peace?
Is C?
Yes, C. And here's a question where you can kind of think about the time that this is occurring. So that the women's suffrage movement started in the 1840s. So abolition of slavery was a big issue then, right? Environmental protest, environmental concerns doesn't come around until the 20th century, late in the 20th century. War protests, well, there's not really any wars going on when this starts, right? And world peace is also not really a subject at the time because we really haven't had those global crises and wars like we had in the 20th century. C, right? Temperance is related to prohibition, right? The temperance movement is part of the prohibition of alcohol movement, which they were aligned with as well. So 45 then, according to the excerpt, the women suffragists used several methods to gain attention for their cause, including which of these? So this would be a check mark here, right? We place a check beside the correct answers. Let me see who's available. Nautica said she's not available at the moment. Levon, I saw you in your car earlier. Are you available to answer a question or two?
Yes, sir.
Okay, why don't you give this one a shot? So according to the excerpt, the women suffragists used several methods to gain attention for their cause. So what did they do? Formed organizations, went to the courts, held meetings, participated in parades. So we're going to check off, there's multiple answers here.
Went to the courts is definitely one. Held meetings.
Yep.
And formed organizations.
There you go, right? That's sort of a common sense, sort of answer, right?
Yes,
right, yeah, you can see it's like probably didn't participate in parades. The other three would be much more practical for their efforts. Okay, so 46, which suffragist made a daring attempt to challenge the denial of women's vote by attempting to vote anyway? She was arrested, convicted, and fined. And let's see, let's try Devi again here for that.
Is D. Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony, that's correct. Yes, she was arrested and fined for trying to vote. And her, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, did not live to actually see the 19th Amendment, ratified. They were never allowed to vote federally in federal elections. 47. Oh, okay. So we got a little downstairs. Let's see what we got here.
You can't.
Okay, so in 1972, okay, this is something we talked about. Richard Nixon assumed the United States presidential office as a popular incumbent. Incumbent means he was the sitting president, right? So he's reelected. However, his tenure in the office was a turbulent time for the nation. In June 1972, police arrested 5 men who had broken into the Democratic National Convention headquarters in the Watergate office building in Washington, D.C. The media discovered those arrested were members of the committee to re-elect the president. One worked at the White House. As a result, people began to question whether the president was aware of this plot. Then, during the investigation, the White House staff engaged in steps to hide evidence pointing to the president. By 1974, the evidence had mounted against the president, who resigned from the office of U.S. president. Something we definitely talked about some here. Let's see, Jessica, are you available to answer a question? Maybe not. How about Kate? Do you take this one? All right, let's go to Debbie then. So after reading the passage, we're going to arrange the following information in the order of events which led to the resignation of the president, right? So this is placing things in time. Okay, so what would go first?
B.
B as in boy?
Yep.
So we're going to start with D, right? So the first thing that happens in the Watergate scandal is the break-in at the office. So D as in dog, break-in at the Democratic National Convention headquarters. So what comes next?
C.
C.
I think it's A.
It is A. Those two are very close in time frames, and it looks like I'm sitting here reading it. The way it's worded, it does say, the media discovered those arrested were members of the committee to re-elect the president. One worked at the White House. As a result, people began to question whether the president was aware. Then, during the investigation, White House staff engaged in steps to hide evidence. That's really.
It's like it kind of bounced. The White House staff members were involved. National.
The
That's
way,
how it.
Yeah, the way it's worded, the structure here, right? Because they're talking about the steps or the discovery that White House staff members were involved. But the reality was the cover-up happened first. This isn't worded really well for this type of answer. So A is the next step, steps to cover up the president. Then C, so discovery that the White House staff were involved. So the cover-up happened first, then the discovery that there were people involved from the White House. And then we have the Supreme Court case, which, yeah, that gets us to his resignation. So the passage is a little, so if something like this were to come up, obviously, Watergate may be something will be discussed in there. So the cover-up happens, and then they discover who all was involved, which is not explained real well in our little passage here. So what we have here, so it is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another, but above all, try something. So here we're getting asked, which of the following is President Roosevelt referring to in the above quote? Franklin Roosevelt. So we talked about Franklin Roosevelt. I'll just throw this out to all of you guys. A, his plan for the future. B, his disability. C, the New Deal or his New Deal. Or D, his job as president. So what are we referencing, or what do you think he's referencing in that quote? So we talked about FDR quite a bit. So let's put something in the chat here. Let's see, his plan for the future. A little more specific than that.
B.
So C, the New Deal. So that's, was a bunch of different public, programs to try to get the United States out of the Great Depression. So that's the things that you should associate with Franklin Roosevelt if a question comes up. For one, the New Deal, which is a bunch of public programs, service programs, and the like to stimulate the economy. World War II, because he was the president at the beginning and through nearly all of World War II. So two things, right? The Great Depression, the New Deal, World War II. That's the era of Franklin Roosevelt. So anything that comes up about Roosevelt, that's something that you'd want to kind of keep in mind. 49, habeas corpus. This was something that didn't mention during the presidency of Lincoln. So I'll answer this one here. So which of the following is used to release a person from improper imprisonment? And that is the writ of habeas corpus, right? So during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus so he could hold people without like formal charges, mostly related to the war. So that is a function that I think he signed like an executive order in order to do that. But yeah, if it comes to the release of a person for improper imprisonment, it's the writ of habeas corpus. And that is the end. So that seems pretty sufficient for today, as far as getting through some practice questions. We got some more tomorrow. I got a couple sets here that we can look at. One thing I want to talk about here. So before we get to the end of the week, I think now, right, you kind of see what the format's going to be. The more prior knowledge that you have, the better, right? Understanding a little bit about history, understanding a little bit about civics, but you also see that a lot of the questions have the information for you, right? You're going to be looking at graphs, you're going to be looking at maps, you're going to be looking at, tables and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a mix, but certainly, if you just, work on analyzing data, maps, charts, and stuff like that, that's going to go a long way to get you through the test. Why I offer you, some history and civics and stuff like that, so you have that sort of background and context for certain questions, right? So with that in mind, do you all have any questions at the end here of our one practice test? Okay, I think in general, and if there's anything that you're thinking, I wish I kind of spent some more time with, graphs or charts or maps or something like that, let me know, because we could kind of focus on that a little bit more. I think at this point you've kind of been exposed to every kind of type of graphic and data that might be on there, and get a good sense of the type of questions they ask about that. So there's no questions. We'll go ahead. We'll take let's say about 15-minute break. We'll start up at 1:20 for language arts today. So I'll see you guys. Wait, that's only 8 minutes. My time's bad today. How about 1:25? About 12 minutes. We'll go to 1:25 for a break, and I'll see you guys over at language arts in a few minutes. All right. Bye-bye.